Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Office Hours. I'm delighted to have Dave Crysler with me here today. Dave, hi, how are you?
Great, Dave. Not always nice to be with another Dave whenever I get the opportunity. So thanks for having me.
It's the two Daves today, and we're going to have a bunch of call-in folks, I'm sure, to talk about operations. For everyone that's joining us, we are going to, I'll share a couple of just brief housekeeping details as we get going on this live broadcast. If you're watching the recording, of course, you're welcome to send notes to Dave and to us, and we're going to share the contact information as we go through, or you can just connect up with me on LinkedIn because I've tagged Dave a bunch of times as we've led up to this. My colleague John Arms isn't able to join us this week. He's got some family stuff, but we are thinking about all of John's fam, and we will see him next week. I'm super excited to chat with Dave today because he is an operations and efficiency master. And I know that this is a lot of things, or these are a lot of things that manufacturers always deal with, but also everybody at the Voyager U community could also learn from. I want to give a little intro about Dave, and then I'm going to let him talk. And as a reminder on the format for today's event, we're going to have Dave talk for about 15 minutes. We're going to open it up to Q&A for about a half hour. And then we're going to leave the last 15 minutes where we're going to pause the recording and go open season on questions and ask anything that you were afraid to record, but that you still want to know. So if you have any specific things, we always save the Effenheimers and the four-letter words until the last 15, but that's kind of what it's about. So Dave's passion for helping small business owners and leaders comes from growing up in an entrepreneurial household. Both his parents owned and continue to own their own businesses, and growing up in that environment taught him many valuable lessons, including what it meant to work hard in your business. I'm super excited to share Dave's contact information and to have Dave talk to us. As I'm spotting here, we have a whole bunch more attendees showing up now. So for everyone that's joining us live, you know the drill, hopefully, but this is your event. So Dave's going to talk for the next 15 or so. Please log any questions in chat, or if you want to ask those questions live, especially in the middle section of our event today, go ahead and raise your hand. And then again, at around 1:30 Central-ish, I'm going to just open it up and add everybody in as a speaker so that you can ask Dave questions as we go. So without further ado, Dave Crysler of the Crysler Club. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Dave. Thanks so much for having me again. And I will do my best to share or to use my 15 minutes wisely, but I would definitely encourage anybody that is out there and in the audience, if you have any questions, I'd love for you to put it in the chat, come up and let's have a conversation, because I think that's where the most value for any of these types of events happen, is in the real conversation. And I'm sure nobody wants to sit here for 15 full minutes and listen to me talk. So thanks for having me though, Dave.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. I'll get in and kind of just expand a little bit on, my story and why operations, why do I love this stuff so much? And as you kind of mentioned in my intro, for me, it was all about growing up in an entrepreneurial household and kind of seeing those, early days, my parents getting up and leaving before I was, up and starting to get ready for school, and then not coming home, until the late hours in the night, and, kind of spending nights and weekends at the shop, as we would affectionately call it. For me, growing up in that, I just thought that was normal. I kind of thought that's what every business owner, every business leader, that's what they did, right? That's the magic. That's how you get to the level that you can get to, is by spending all of your time being involved in every aspect of your business. And, so kind of growing up in that environment, and, Dave, as you can probably imagine, sometimes I was the kid that, maybe my parents weren't at the sporting event, or weren't at the, the Christmas concert or whatever. And, again, I thought that was all just kind of part of the deal. Yeah. So for me, I aspired to do something different, right? Well, if this is what it's like to be a small business owner, I'm going to go work for a really big company. I want to have, all the responsibility. I want to be able to, travel all the time and do all these, fun, adventurous things, right? And make, make the money, so to speak, all along with that. And so that's what I found myself doing. After I graduated high school and I was attending college, I worked for my parents for a handful of years. They ultimately sold that business to somebody else. I stayed there until that new business owner ended up closing that particular business. And so beyond that, I found myself working for a really large publicly traded company that grew through acquisition. And that's where I spent the majority of my professional career. I spent nearly 20 years working for this company, and I was solely in the manufacturing space. They would acquire first and second generation, typically first and second generation family owned businesses. So I kind of got to see again another cycle of businesses come through. And it was really during that time that I kind of started to, as I was getting additional responsibility. I've told this story before, but I'll never kind of forget my first role with that company. I was the assistant shipping supervisor. Like, I'm pretty sure that's the lowest form of operations management that, exists on the planet. And I'll never forget that experience, because it was kind of like, okay, I know that I've got this role. I know I want to come in and, impact the company, and I know what our, KPIs are, but like, well, where do I start? Like, what does that even mean? I had no idea what I was doing. I was a 20-year-old kid that just got a operations management opportunity. And, so it was a bit of, feeling like a lost puppy, so to speak. But as I kind of found my role and figured out ways to drive improvements, and then obviously started to get much larger roles and responsibilities, ultimately getting to the point where I was relocating to manage facilities. I was being tapped to mentor the new leadership teams of acquisition facilities. I was being tapped to implement ERP systems and quality management systems and kind of the full gamut of things. That it was during that kind of span that I really started to realize that for me, the way I kind of was taught to lead and to manage and to improve things, I couldn't do that anymore. I really had to figure out this way to be able to engage people and to empower them, because oftentimes as I would get a new facility, I didn't know any of the people there, didn't know what the equipment mix was. It was kind of like, hey, we just bought this business. Let's go and figure out how are we going to sell more stuff, make more, profit with what we just sold, and, take advantage of all the good things that we've got going on, but, fold them into the corporate culture. Let's get them systemized. Let's put in documented process control and all these different things. So, I got a lot of opportunities to practice that. And so as I said, I, did that for nearly 20 years. And as I tell this story, I was 40 years old, newly married, and expecting our first child on the way. And my wife and I were living in Missouri at the time, and kind of woke up and I said, "Oh my gosh, I'm literally going to be just like my parents. I work a crazy amount of hours. I travel a significant amount. If I continue on this path, my travel is going to grow exponentially." And, so I kind of had that epiphany moment, if you will, and said, I want to try something different. And that ultimately led me to an opportunity to buy into a small manufacturing business back in Michigan, where my wife and I were both from. And so it took that opportunity. It was another owner operator model. Didn't do a lot of what I like to call infrastructure, right? Planning, people, process, technology. They didn't have a lot of that, but this was a person that had built a business from zero, was very successful, and looking to retire over the next couple of years. So, I came in and bought half of the business, did what I do, so to speak. And it was very interesting because, it was during that time where, we grew the business by about 25% in a year and a half, and had the infrastructure in place. And so, the other owner was kind of like, "Hey, this is great. Things are going really well. And, we've got systems and things in place to kind of take the load off of me. And I'm not sure when I'm going to be ready to retire. And, for me, it was, well, wait a second, that wasn't quite what we discussed and what the deal was. And, so ultimately, I made the difficult decision to leave that business and to sell my half back, because I never really intended on getting in a partnership with somebody. But I tell my whole kind of origin story to get me to the point of why I created the Crysler Club and what it's all about, and building out business systems, because that's the full circle moment for me, right? It's seeing all of these opportunities to work with small business owners, with these leadership teams that are doing so many things so well, and yet have hit this plateau. They're crazy stressed out because of the hours that they're working, because they're, trying to pursue a bunch of different continuous improvement projects and, efficiency tasks and all kinds of things. And, as I say, it's kind of like what's got you here won't necessarily get you there. And so for me, creating this business, this operations consulting business, is all about helping, business owners and leaders kind of make this shift from working in their business to working on it. And the way that we go about that is taking a business systems approach to it. And that breaks down beyond that to, kind of 4 core areas that I love to talk about, which is planning, people, process, and technology. And, no matter what the challenge is within the businesses, and I kind of go back and pull from my own personal experience, being thrown into the deep end of the pool, saying, okay, here's this business. It's generating revenue. It's generating some form of profitability. Here's the rest of the KPIs that we're looking at. How are we going to return more value to our shareholders? Right. And whether we're looking at it from that lens in terms of how do we deliver more value to our shareholders, or now in the consulting business, how do we deliver more value, to the business owner, or to, your own shareholders, if it's something that you've, raised capital for. So that's kind of the high level story, right, and the kind of full circle moment it is for me. And why I get so jazzed up about talking about this stuff, because, it's people, at least in my experience, these small business owners and leadership teams are great at what they did. That's what drove them there. That's what got them going. And at some point, that kind of constant need to evolve and get to that next plateau seems to be the stumbling block. And that's where I love to come in and help people kind of not only map that out from a strategic standpoint, but actually get dirty and get knee deep into the implementation. Yeah. That's where I really love to shine. So.
Well, I think for the folks that are on as our participants today, I know that one has a brand new business that they're doing sales coaching and kind of business coaching. One's a sales master who helps businesses to supercharge their sales. We've got a marketer. We've got another process coach, I believe, on, and I'm not sure a couple of the other ones, but I think for these folks, and especially for, kind of the fractional executive market that's housed under Voyager U, what would you tell folks that they need to either look at, or the questions that they need to ask? We've been really heavy on the marketing side because that's what John and I do. But that assumes that you can just do the business when you're selling, when you're out there in marketing, right? So for folks that are on the side of us, or like John and I, what would you tell us, or those people that are bringing it together? It's like, how do you smooth out and make sure that you're actually able to deliver the things that you're selling?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, I said earlier, kind of the core 4 that I like to talk about. And most people, I would say, in this space talk about 3 out of the 4, right? You will very often hear people, process, technology. And the reason that I lead with planning, and I always say them in that order, is because that's exactly what I tell people. How do you deliver this stuff? You have to be able to plan to a certain extent, right? I think sometimes when we talk about planning, people get in their mind that we're creating the perfect plan. It has nothing to do with the perfect plan, but I've seen far too often that businesses start with technology, or they start with people, And without the plan, without the processes, right, without having these four things in this very particular order, I just see too many points of failure because you don't understand what, from a technology perspective, what is it that we're trying to automate, right? What are the processes? What are the roadblocks that the people are, running into that this technology is going to solve, right? So unless we have a great understanding of the planning people process, it's going to be pretty challenging to implement technology. It can be a huge roadblock. And for that reason alone, that's why, like when it comes to, let's say, ERP implementations, I was having this conversation earlier with somebody, but, it's almost an 80%, it's like 78 and some change percent failure rate for ERP implementations. And it's failure and dissatisfaction of the implementation. But I kind of make that a much broader stroke. I say when you don't have the first three things dialed in, so when you don't have a plan, a starting point, and you've not considered the people and process part, technology really is going to do you a disservice. So from my perspective, that's where I would tell people to start. When it comes to the execution and the delivery of what you guys are working on from a marketing perspective, it is making sure that you've got, those core four things answered, and that you are really engaging, that people component to understand what the roadblocks are from the process and technology side, so that ultimately you can make more mindful decisions moving forward to help streamline them. And the other thing I would add to that is the fact that too often leadership looks at automation and process improvement, continuous improvement, technology gains as a means to reduce, labor. And I challenge people to redeploy that labor because when you have people that are really excited about the mission of the company and you guys are kind of firing on all cylinders, the easiest way to take the wind out of those sails is by reducing labor. And if you can redeploy that labor and you've thought about this from, the planning people process technology standpoint, more times than not, I have seen a significant increase in revenue, increase in profitability, because you've redeployed people that are energized about what you're doing. They just want to do more. I want to do more. I want to do more.
Yeah.
So that's what I would tell people.
Excellent. ERP you mentioned, and I just want to back into that because not everyone probably has a background in process and technology, but enterprise resource planning, right? Did I get that right?
Yep.
Perfect. So it's the technology that helps you plan and do the things that you do. And so for that, and as you're building a plan, or when you come in with a business that, most businesses start, they see a need, they fill a need, right? And like I love the book, The E-Myth Revisited, and that's you're really awesome at something, and so you just keep doing that something. And for a lot of the people that are online with us or watching after this, they are amazing marketers, or they're amazing revenue drivers, or they're chief operating officers, or even CFOs where they're great at finance. How do you translate that being really good at what you do as either an entrepreneur or as a fractional, and make that into a process that you can use to grow your business?
Yeah, it's going to be different for different people, right? But if we take a look at it at a high level, it kind of boils down to a few things. Number one, documenting and understanding, what are you doing? What does your process look like? Where are you spending your time? All those types of things. Kind of number two is, once you understand what you're doing, where you're spending your time, what your process looks like. Number two is really engaging people. And if, the larger the team you have, the easier this becomes, right? But it's really about engaging and empowering people as that second part of that.
Sure.
And not necessarily just to delegate, right? I mean, that can be a kind of a component of this. But what I challenge people to do is to get outside opinions on how a particular process can be done better, right? Just because you've outlined a particular process and you think, okay, this is the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that should be best practice, right? So the more kind of minds, right? Talk about collective brain power, and the larger, whether we want to talk about department, team, right? Like let's get super granular. Team, department, organization, macro, right? So the larger that is, the easier it kind of becomes, because yes, you don't want this situation where it's, process by committee or decision by committee, but there is real power in engaging other people and you being open to that, both from just a straight up leadership perspective, because again, not everybody has been taught how to engage and empower people, right? Like I've done some videos on this before where it's like, well, it's just talking, right? Like, what's the big deal? It's not, it's much deeper than just having a conversation with somebody. So those are the couple of things from my standpoint. You have to ultimately be the decision maker and kind of put a stake in the ground, right? So that's kind of where I say, we're going to plan, but then we're going to execute that plan, right? And then review, revise, repeat. So we're not creating the perfect plan with what we're trying to develop from a process standpoint, or, from a technology implementation standpoint or discovery standpoint, right? We're kind of putting a stake in the ground. And that also cuts through the, leadership by committee, right? It's somebody still has to make the decision. And as a leader, that has to be you. Right. But it's very advantageous for you to take advantage of the collective brain power of your team and, solicit ideas, right? Because who's to say as the leader, you have the best idea? Chances are it's somebody else that's a little bit closer to that particular process that may have some insight. It's the outside looking in, kind of scenario. So.
Excellent. We have a couple of questions from Tom. And he says, what do you think about leaders who want to change the process to fit the technology? And I think as marketers in particular, we have shiny object syndrome. It's like, oh, that's really cool. Let's just change the whole business for that. Then he also wanted to, if you've done some EOS.
Yeah. So I'll answer the EOS question first.
Sure.
I do not. I would say I believe in it, right? Because it's no different than any other kind of methodology. There's a bunch of different methodologies that are out there. There's a bunch of different systems that are out there. To me, at the heart of it, they're all saying the same thing, right? It's all about continuous improvement. It's all about engaging and empowering people. It's all about, creating systems around what you do from a process standpoint to do it better, faster, less expensive, better outcome, right? So totally on board with all of that. I look at it like the same way.
Traction
entrepreneurial operating system is the EOS.
Yeah. Perfect.
But I look at it the same way as I look at, let's say, technology. There's 1,000 different platforms. There's 1,000 different technologies that you can choose, right? Does that make one far superior than another? No. I mean, it really comes down to, what the requirements are of your particular scenario. And I kind of look at, EOS and some of the other ones that are out there as the same way. So that in terms of the other question about changing the process to fit technology, I don't think you should change for change's sake. Right. But I do think that you need to evaluate the process. And again, that's why I go back to my order, right? Planning, people, process, technology. So when it comes to implementing technology, if we sit down and we have a plan and we engage people to understand what the processes are that they're doing, what those roadblocks are, then we can identify the technology to ultimately implement. And in that process, more times than not, I have seen process change being implemented. One of the worst things that you can do from a technology standpoint is to just build what you've already had in the new technology. And I'm sure you've probably seen that, many times over. So from that standpoint, I'm a huge proponent of changing process. I would not say you could blanket statement that we should be changing process to
Right.
fit the technology,
Yeah.
because in my opinion, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, right?
Right.
We have to put that's a little bit like putting the cart before the horse, so to speak.
Right.
So.
Well, and what I think is fascinating, especially about what you're an expert in versus what I'm an expert in, is you're in the business of making sure that your business runs better, and you can make more money by doing that, right? And by, increasing revenue and or just doing more X or whatever, right? And I'm in the market of helping you get more business so that whatever you're doing is something that people are consuming, right? So
Yeah.
I think the funnest thing for especially this audience is going to be, how do you kind of take stock and reset your compass if things aren't working quite the way that you want them to? So do you have some samples of like questions, or like we all get a little navel gazily around the first of the year, and we're still kind of at the beginning in the first quarter, but as you're looking at, am I still doing what I want to do, or am I making as much money as I could? Are there some real big gotcha questions or things that tend to open business owners' eyes that will tease out a result and kind of nudge them to making an improvement?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. From my standpoint, it really comes down to the financials, or really any KPIs, but those are the easiest ones that are, kind of easiest, if that's a word, understood, right? And it gets back to kind of what you said, right? In terms of where we fit in and bring value to people. My entire career was based around managing existing business that we had to figure out, how do we squeeze more out of what we already had? Yes, to your point, we want to continue to, leverage what we were doing to try to go out and find more, right? But how do we take what we already have and really get as much as humanly possible out of that, thing? So, approaching it from that standpoint always led us to look at financial KPIs. And I would say that's the best place to start, right? Like some questions that I ask: are you happy with where your current level of profitability is? Do you think that you are maximized in terms of what you're generating from a, net profitability standpoint? And most people would say, we could probably be doing a little bit better. Okay, well, let's get into that. What do you think? Is your cost of quality high? Do you feel like, you have too many touch points? Do you feel like, if you were to look at kind of the macro picture of how you deliver value, like where do you think that there's waste within that? So those are the easy ones to tie into. And the other thing I would say is I really encourage people at least once a quarter to kind of take stock of, what are the revenue and profitability goals? What are some of the efficiency and utilization goals? Not everybody has, and again, this is going to be dependent on what kind of systems, what kind of technology you have in your business to understand some of these more finite KPIs. So you might not have access to utilization or efficiency numbers, but you for sure have access to, your sales and profitability numbers. You for sure will have some access to your cost of quality numbers. Right. So let's start with what you have. We don't have to create new KPIs. We can just evaluate what you currently have. What's your product cycle time, right? How many on-time deliveries do you have? Like we can pick any KPI that you're tracking and say, let's have a conversation around that. Are you happy with where this is at, or do you feel like there's room for improvement? And more often than not, there will be room for improvement. And then it's just a matter of dialing into planning, people, process, technology to find out what's the bucket, and then we attack that bucket.
Yeah. Well, and it applies across, whether you're developing and delivering thought or, consulting, or if you're developing actual widgets in manufacturing, right? So even if you're, like me, I'm a marketing agency or Busy as a marketing agency, we still need to be delivering our product, our advertising, our content quicker, better, with more quality and all that. So this applies across all industries. We have some
Yeah.
really interesting comments that I want to bring up inside of here. And actually, for the group that's on, I'd actually like to activate everyone and allow you all to talk. So Tom and Bruce, if you want to ask your questions in person, now's the time. Otherwise, I'll read them off. But I'm going to, fair warning, I'm letting everybody talk. So we're going to see some more faces on
I
here
love it.
now. And if
This
you want
is
to
this is
ask
the
the
best
question,
part. So
it totally is. And this is where it gets really interesting. And I know that Bruce in particular is going to have some commentary for us on how things work, because he also does some process consulting. So
I
um,
I see Bruce's comment in the
yeah,
comments, and yeah, I love it. I hope people jump on here and
yeah.
articulate that, because it is spot on, spot
Well,
on.
let me back in and just talk to Tom's comment for a minute. And he said, I've seen
Yeah,
several businesses that don't want to work in an or want to customize an ERP, an enterprise resource processing or planning tool. So they'll just change their process to fit whatever that ERP will do. And yeah, sure, that's fine. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. But Bruce, do you want to give your comment live?
Sure. I mean, you were talking about automating, and I
Yeah.
mean, it's been the age-old adage of, well, we'll just automate it. That'll fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day, the ridiculousness that happened with some of the automation where we'll put a robot in there, and now we turn a one-person process into a two-person process because someone's got to feed the robot.
Right.
Someone's got to take it from there.
Oh
So I
my.
actually went through a stretch where, as lean and CI really took hold, and you start to understand some of these tools, that sometimes automation is the worst damn thing you can do,
Mm-hmm.
because now you
yeah.
just created an overly complicated process sometimes.
Right. Why
Well,
automate
it's
something that you shouldn't
to,
do at all? Yeah.
yeah, to that point, it's because when you don't understand what the process, really is from a detail perspective, and what the operators or whomever is executing the process, the roadblocks that they run into, kind of to Bruce's point, right? Like, where we're looking at it from a high level, we're just going to automate this, and then you end up introducing additional touch points and additional labor that needs to happen because, oh, you know what? That's right. We didn't, yeah, we forgot that part. We didn't include that into the original scope of what we were trying to do. So,
Excellent. And I think as I'm thinking about these, and I'm bringing it back into my world a little bit too. ERPs or business process systems don't always take the form of an official bespoke ERP. Like for us, it might just be a project management tool, right? Or a CRM if you're a communications and or marketing kind of organization that focuses on making connections. And certainly you can automate and improve processes across marketing as well as you can anything in the delivery of a business. What
yeah.
should it are there some good starter tools that you guys, Dave, Bruce, anybody else on the line think or want to raise up as here's a great spot to start getting your poop in a group, so to speak, for your business and improving things?
I mean, from my standpoint, Dave, it really depends on where you're starting from, right? But at its simplest form, you can literally start today with Excel, with a
Yep,
written
yep, yep.
notepad, right? Like, I
Uh-huh.
mean, it depends on how rudimentary you are today versus how advanced your business is today in terms of what that starting point looks like. But too often it's kind of like that, at least from my perspective, it's like that perfect planning scenario, right? Too often people utilize that as the reason, well, I don't have the right tool. I don't have the right, methodology. And again, the way I like to look at it is breaking it down into those four buckets. You can start to document and to brainstorm and to engage and empower people around those things to understand what are the biggest roadblocks that people are facing. And that's where you start, right? You don't have to have an overarching master strategy. Will that help you in the long run? 100%, right? But if you're like, hey, I don't know, I just got to do something. Well, do something, go grab your team, go have a meeting and say, list out 5 roadblocks that you run into on a day-to-day basis. What are they? How much time do you spend on them? And there's your list of, if you got a team of 2 people, there's 10 things
Mhm.
that you can now have a conversation about and dive into, right?
Yeah.
It can literally be that simple. It does not have to be, a complex overarching strategy just yet, right? Like, yeah, we can get there. Yeah, over the course of time, that's going to help you to understand what the trajectory of, improvement and growth can be within your business, but it doesn't have to start there. And for some other businesses, I'll just give you the opposite end of that, right? For some businesses that have a fully integrated ERP that are used to, being in a planning cycle and all of those types of things, chances are they're going to already have a series of tools that they use to automate processes and have technology. Chances are they're going to have some planning pre-done. For me, those businesses, it's again, all about getting the team together, talking about the roadblocks. Why aren't they utilizing particular sets of technology? Why aren't they, going through and following particular processes? So you can do, process audits and those types of things. So, yeah.
So Dave, just a comment, if I may.
Yeah.
Hey, Tom.
So, one of the things that I think that sometimes gets forgotten when you're putting together your KPIs, like you had mentioned, on-time delivery. But some companies forget is to put into that mix, what are the customer's expectations? You may have a goal of, a 3-day delivery, but yet the marketplace is at 48 hours. So a lot of companies think they're doing great, they're world-class, but in the eyes of the customer, there's still room for improvement. So that's one watch out.
Mhm.
The other thing is that in my former life, when we were looking at ERP systems, and this was very basic and kind of rudimentary, but the customer service group interacts with all functions of the company. They interact with accounting, they interact with production, they interact with management, they interact with the customer. So we had them just jot down questions that they received over the course of a month that they could not answer without having to go talk to somebody or having to make phone calls.
Mhm.
And that helped us scope out what kind of information, accessibility that we needed in a system, so that customer service could basically see a day in the life of an order, from quote to order to production to delivery. After delivery, was there a claim? Was the claim resolved? I mean, that whole life, and that was huge. That was a bigger company, but I would just throw that out, that just think about questions that you can't answer with information at your fingertips.
Right on.
Yeah, I really love that, Tom. I mean, the thing I would add to it is really just a summary, but it's understanding what that customer journey looks like, because when you understand that, you can not only build out tools that are available, but you can create content around them. And then obviously internally, you are building out infrastructure to be able to support what's coming at you. So yeah, I love all of what you just said. Fantastic.
One other watch out regarding ISO. I've been with a couple companies that were ISO certified, and that's a big expense. It's a big project to get ISO certified. But what I found, and the whole thing of ISO was, to document your process, be able to measure your process, and be able and have a tool to improve your process. But the companies that I saw where they fell short was, once they got their ISO certification, then that became a barrier for improvement, because somebody would come up with a new idea on how to do something. And the resistance was, well, we can't do that because our ISO documentation and we're certified on this other process over here. So we can't change the process, because that's going to require that we have to go back and redo the whole documentation, the works, constructions, all that kind of stuff to accommodate the new process. So they stagnate. They get their certification, and then those are the processes that they live with going forward. So curious if you've seen that or had any issues like that.
Yes and no. So what I would kind of add to that in my experience is, ISO gives you a lot of great baselines to work off of, and depending on what standard you're trying to implement to, can kind of fall in the bucket that you're talking about. What I see more often is the lack of auditing until, a couple weeks before recertification. And typically what happens is it's just to check the boxes. So, if you're being required, let's say you're maybe a tier 2 or tier 3 supplier, and you're being required because of, who you're ultimately supplying from take a manufacturing example here, you're being required, but you don't really live it, right? It's just a box you're checking. That to me is really doing your entire business a disservice. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I kind of feel like that's where some of what you've seen before is from the standpoint of not really having the full buy-in to what that means. Because if you are fully bought in and you are ISO certified and there is an opportunity to improve a process, then you want the best in class. You want to make sure that you are continually not only improving, but continually following the documented processes that are outlined within your, work instruction documents. So I feel like it's more of a kind of a leadership buy-in standpoint than anything, but I would also say that kind of goes with any type of improvement effort. Whether we're talking about, hey, we're going to implement EOS or we're just going to go on our own lean journey, we're going to do ISO. I mean, fill in the blank, right? Like it starts at the top. It starts with leadership. If they're not bought in and they don't believe in this stuff, you're going to have a really difficult time, getting it to flow out to the floor, getting people to adopt it, and getting people to actually do the heavy lifting required to make this stuff work and make it an ongoing effort.
Dave, this is Bruce. Those exact words were formulating in my head as you started to say it. The companies that are ISO certified, there's so many of them that it was a requirement. They had to be that to have this hunk of business or whatever. So you're right. They check it and they check the box. They throw it in the drawer, and once a year they dust it off because holy crap, here comes the auditor. We got to get ready. And that same company probably has no CI philosophy at all. No real lean journey. To your point about EOS, they're probably not following that either. And so that structure's not there. I was an anti-ISO guy. I just never worked in an environment with it until I crossed paths where they said, we're going to get ISO certified and you're going to get us there.
Nothing like getting you to buy in, huh?
And so you drink from the higher fire hose, because I was always told, and I never looked any further because I didn't need to, that lean and ISO, they don't work together. ISO's all this documentation and all this stuff, and lean's like, get rid of all that stuff, clean it up, simplify it. Well, when you're told you're going to get the company certified, okay, better understand what you're dealing with. I understand how wrong that thinking was, and it's just another continuous improvement tool. So just like the rest of them, if you'll embrace it, but it's got to be from the top down. It never works from the middle. I mean, yet some of it does, but not like it can. But if you embrace it, ISO can be your friend. And because it creates the path to improvement. And those that don't understand it go, oh my God, you know what we got to do? We got to change 3 processes or 3 procedures in all our QMS documentation so that we can go do this new thing. Screw it, we'll just do it the way we're doing it. It's easier.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's where that whole audit piece comes in, and you already know this, Bruce, but I mean, how often have you walked through a facility and it's, hey, we're gonna, let's pull out this ISO manual and let's audit this documented process, and lo and behold, you find out that they're not doing it that way because something changed in the inputs, let's say, and so that required a change and it never got documented. But I totally agree with you from the standpoint of it is kind of a gateway. I mean, going back to, where I learned the process documentation, it was from one of my very first roles. We had brought in an outside ISO person, ISO consultant, to help us go through process documentation. So that was kind of my very first foray into understanding what real process documentation was all about, kind of visual workplace stuff and giving operators, like especially you brought up QMS, like giving operators the access, and I'm talking like immediate access at their workstation to reference material and, die line designs and things that they needed, but that we made it very difficult for them to go find, or we relied on customer service to put it into the, job jacket information. And, then it was like, well, why didn't Susie put this in there? It's like you go down this whole myriad of problems with it. So yeah, I'm totally in alignment with what you're saying there.
One thing, and not to beat up on ISO too much, but one of the things with ISO is that if you say we're going to make junk, and this is the process that we're going to use to make junk, and you follow that process and you document that process, you can get certified. It's not a guarantee that you're going to make a quality product.
Yeah.
Back to your point, Tom, earlier about understanding what the expectation is, right, from the customer, like, in terms of turn times, right? It's the same thought process. And I totally agree with that, with that example.
I think we're at the time when I normally pause the recording, but I wanna give Dave, Bruce, Tom, Alex, everybody that's on the call, if you have one thing that you want the recorded audience to know, kind of in closing, I'd love to hear that. And then one more layer on that, if you have a book or a starting place that you think folks should start at, if they're looking to simply improve their businesses, where should they start? So Dave, you have the floor.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Wow. That's a great question. I mean, there are tons and tons of amazing resources. I'm going to go a little bit of a different route than you may expect. So I'm going to call out a recent book that I read that I felt like was a tremendous impact from kind of a leadership understanding. And I think it really speaks about emotional components, and how you can utilize emotional components within business, within leadership to build better relationships and to ultimately, from my perspective, drive improvement throughout your organization. That's a book by Gary Vaynerchuk called 12 and a half.
Okay. I know Gary V. I have he's good at thought-provoking content. So the 12 and a half.
12 and a half. Yep. It's a tremendous read. It's a relatively quick read. And again, and I've read many books over the course of time, but this was a recent one and one I really felt was impactful. I love talking about it and sharing about it. And it's one that I don't think everybody would immediately call out as a valuable resource from a kind of leadership, a business ownership standpoint. But I would highly recommend it. It's a great place to get some really good self-reflection.
Excellent. I pasted the Amazon link in for that. Thanks, Dave. And any closing comments before we pause the recording and open it up to the wild west of unrecorded commentary?
I think the only thing that I would really add that we haven't, that we've talked about, but the only thing I would encourage people to do is to really understand where is it that they're trying to go, right? Because too often we can say that we want to improve something, we're, trying to do this, we're trying to do that, but really being focused on what the goals are. What KPIs are you looking at to understand, how did I come to this decision? And also recognizing, at least for, the business owners and leadership teams that I work with, it's okay to be where you're at, right? Like nobody's saying that you have to grow your business to a certain level. It's success means different things to different people, and be okay with recognizing what you want that to be for you and your team and where you're at. And then, you can take it from there. And there's lots of resources available to learn this stuff. And obviously if somebody has questions, I'd love to, be one of those resources, but I think that's where I would end it, Dave.
Thanks, Dave. And let me wrap up with the recorded side. If you'd like to get a hold of Dave, he's at, I believe it's LinkedIn is David Crysler, Crysler. So LinkedIn/in/David Crysler, or you can hit him up at dave@thechryslerclub.com. Dave, thanks for the time. And I'll do one last thing for our audience here before I pause the recording. Even if you're a fractional executive, that's a marketer that's doing things, the underlying thing inside of certainly this conversation for these folks is that keep an eye on what you're doing with an eye to doing better. And that's really what the process of operations and improvement is all about. And it could just be keeping track every time that you see something that you have to do more than once. How do you automate it? How do you improve it? Or, are there things that you hate doing that you want to figure out how to not have to do anymore? Right. So it's the process and the culture of continual improvement and just thinking about how can I do this better, faster, cheaper, whatever it is for you. So don't be afraid to think about it and don't get stuck in stasis and simply just sit in something that you could be doing better. Awesome. Well, I'm going to pause recording. For everyone that's watching from YouTube, please go ahead and subscribe and watch out for our updates on Voyager U and via my networks. And please go ahead and subscribe up and register for any of these events that we have coming up. We've got a lot of new ones coming. And so I think next week we have Tim Voigt. He's going to talk about legal issues. We've got Tony Wilson from Equip talking about finance. We've got Billy Fetzner talking about content and authority and how to build authority on LinkedIn. And we've got a whole bunch of other folks coming up in the near future. And if you're a part of our community, we'd also love to hear from you because we're all experts in what we do. Thanks, everybody. If you're watching along, attendees, please hang on because we're going to open it up to general questions. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Dave.